Welcome, everyone. I'm Yael Aronoff, Director of the Sterling Institute for Jewish Studies in Modern Israel, and we've had a busy semester with lots of interesting events, and it's wonderful to see actually so many of you here during a very hectic, tiring end of the semester for many of us, so it's wonderful to see you. It's a real honor for us to have the Ada Weintraub Finifter lecture this evening by Professor Andreas Bouroutis on language as identity, the Greek Romaniote Jews in the 20th century. I just wanted to thank kind of the donors for this endowed lectureship that we have. Her name is Ada Weintraub Finifter, and she used to be a professor here at MSU before she unfortunately passed away, but her brother Leon Weintraub is listening as well, so thank you to you. And her grandparents came from Yanina, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and they came in the 1920s to New York, were very involved in setting up Romaniote Jewish synagogue in New York City, and we're very active, and so this is for our community to learn more about the experience of Romaniote Jews. Is that okay? And yes, thank you. That's a picture of Ada Weintraub. I also want to thank, before we get started, I want to thank our many co-sponsors across the university, who are sponsoring this lecture, or helping to co-sponsor this lecture today. Among them are James Madison College, the College of Arts and Letters, the College of Social Science, International Studies and Programs, the Residential College of Arts and Humanities, the History Department, where Professor Bouroutis is teaching to I think about 200 students in the history department focused on these subjects this year. The Peace and Justice program, and the Department of Languages. I know there's the new name. I'm looking at Lynn Wolf here, Department of Linguistics, Cultures and Languages. Sorry that I'm also tired this week at the end of the semester, but we're really, really thrilled to have that support across the university. So let me just give a quick introduction. We've been very lucky to have Professor Andreas with us here today as the Ada Weintraub Finifter visiting professor at MSU. So he's a historian, political scientist, and economist. He's a lecturer in the Department of Political Science at Aristotle University of Thessaloniki and the Hellenic Open University. He's also done many things, including a postdoctoral research fellow at Yad Vashem Holocaust Research Institute in Jerusalem. He has published several articles in Greece and abroad about the Jewish communities and the Holocaust. And his book, In Greek, Holocaust in Thessaloniki, the Italians and the Jewish Students of Umberto Primo School, was published in 2020 and was shortlisted for the Greek National Book Prize Award. His research interests include multicultural societies, Mediterranean port cities, and transnational aspects, state formation and imperialism in Balkans and Europe, and Jewish communities in Greece and the Balkans. So it's with a great honor. This is just a quick highlight of many things that Professor Andreas has published, and we're truly honored to have you with us this evening and to learn from you. So thank you so much, and we'll have a discussion when it ends, and if you ask questions, please come to the microphone because it's being live streamed. So welcome also people from around the country and the globe that are listening to this. And very finally, for those faculty and students who are here with us from MSU, we also have, through this endowment, research scholarships for people who'd like to do research in this area, whether it includes doing research in Greece or whether it includes going to New York City to do some of this research. And so you're all, if anybody has interest, welcome to apply to that. And Dr. Bouroutis is going to do a kind of information session over Zoom for people interested in doing research in this area in terms of what resources you could be using in Greece, what resources you could be using elsewhere in your research if you'd like to learn more about it. And this is something that you'd be interested in following up on. And as I said, the Sterling Institute has research scholarships that you can apply to, whether you're a student or your faculty, to pursue research in this area. So thank you so much, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you. So good afternoon, thank you for being here, because I know it's the end of the semester, and especially for my students, that they were complaining, that it's in the end of the semester. I was thinking actually to come here with striped pajamas and slippers and socks to be at the MSU, environment, that it's like a fashion, I really envy it. Anyway, but I had to be properly dressed because for the event. So I would like to thank Dr. Arora for the invitation to address to you. And it's an honor, actually, to teach at Michigan State University and at the History Department. They were so pleased that I came, that they gave me a class of 200 students. Thank you very much, Mickey. So I will share a couple of words because I'm honored to be a recipient of the scholarship on the name of Ada Weintraub Finifter, that they were written by Professor Paul Abramsons in his obituary in 2011 after he passed away. Ada was born in Brooklyn, New York on June 6, 1938, and graduated from Brooklyn College with honors in political science in 1959. She attended the University of Michigan, earning her master's degrees, and afterwards her PhD. She was promoted as associate professor at Michigan State University in 1972 and to professor in 1981. So she edited several influential books, The State of the Discipline in 1983, a second volume a few years after, and The Alienation and the Social System in 1972. She analyzed controversies about the meaning of alienation and also presents some of the best Marxist and non-Marxist writings about this concept. She even wrote in the very beginning, 40 years ago, in 1984, she wrote a first text about how to use personal computers. So using the IBM personal computer Easy Writer. Okay, we developed it then, computer for dummies. Anyway, but it was in 1984, she was pioneer. So Ada was more than a trooper, then she was also a leader. She entered the profession when there were few female political scientists, that is true, and also the field was actually in the very beginning. And the discipline that with her accomplices, with her work was completely transformed and played a major role in both by being a role model and by personally encouraging young women to get into this very, masculine field at that time as a political scientist. So my topic will be in a clause, in a theme, that refers to a clause within a clause, because actually the Romaniote Greek Jews, they consist a small group of people in a rather small country that the language of this country, the Greek, everybody admires, ancient Greece, about democracy, about the philosophers, but very few people know anything about modern Greece, and even more about how this language is spoken. So to trace the first steps of the Jews in the Greek territories, what it's now, today, Greece, we have to go back in the CE years. This is Thessaloniki, roughly we are thinking that around the 4th CE century, BC, we have the first traces of presence of Jews in the Greek territories. There were other merchants, or probably some of them, they were enslaved and they were brought in the Greek territories along with their masters. So the first actual script that we have is when Apostle Paul addressed at the synagogue of Thessaloniki. So we know that we had a synagogue in Thessaloniki just in the beginning of the Common Era. It's one of the first steps, and actually that shows us that Thessaloniki was, we draw out many information by that Thessaloniki was also a commercial hub at that time. So that is probably brought Jewish merchants and traders in the city of Thessaloniki. So this is a part of the city. I live there, so I have to promote a little bit of the city. This is the Rotunda of Galerius, and actually it was one of the, in the tetrarch system of the Roman Empire as it developed, it was one of the capitals. And this is the inside, and this is the Galeria Arch that we also using it in protests to have banners. It's not like in here at MSU, that I saw, to my surprise, that you have only the rock to write, to have graffiti. We are doing graffitis wherever you want, and especially in the university. So this is, it's quite interesting because antiquities were part of social life. I mean, they were part of life. Even the Galerius Arch, the part of it was, was one side of houses. One side of the walls of houses in the early 1900s. This is how today is all the Galerian complex, and this is how it used to be in the Roman years. We had the Hippodrome, we had the Rotunda, as you say, we had the Via Regia, and it was a quite important, we figured out from the excavations. We have a couple of archaeologists here, and professors, colleagues, and it was one of the most important cities in the Roman administration system. And this is St. Demetrius, that it's the saint protector of the city. Actually, it was the city was annexed by the Greek army on the day, it was with the old calendar, we don't use it anymore, but anyway, we use the date because of its significance, that it was liberated, it was annexed by the Greek army during the Balkan Wars on the day of, we were celebrating his name day. So the first interactions between the Greek element and the Jewish one came in Alexandria, because Alexandria was one of the Hellenistic kingdoms. So, and it was used, it's quite interesting that it was because the most literate people at that time were some Jewish intellectuals that they were named the 70 Alexandrian scholars. I don't know if I think there were 72, but we rounded in 70. That they made transcripts of the Torah, for instance, in Greek, because all the Jews in Alexandria were speaking Greek at that time. So, and these scholars translated many of the texts also in Greek. It is this notion, this combination, this bonding between the two sides, the ancient Greek philosophers, that they were targeted one truth, one wisdom, one spirit, with a Mosaic law of one God, is the pursuit of one. It was quite, it's quite interesting for this time. So it was a steady liaison, it was a steady connection between the two sides in the first years of the Common Era. So we have the traces, we already have them in different places, even in ancient Delos, that is a sacred place from antiquity, we have traces of an ancient synagogue. So we know that we had these Jewish enclaves in Thessaloniki, in Veria, in Corinth, in Patras, that were spread around, and in Athens. Thessaloniki, however, because of the synagogue, we know that it was a landmark for the Jews. And the same applied for most of the communities in the towns that they were commercial hubs. And the most important, they were speaking Greek, this is the most important thing if someone wants to remember, that they were speaking and they still speak Greek, and they are Jews in the religion. And this is unique. I mean, it's a quite important community for Greece at the moment, even that there are very few in number. So during the Eastern Roman period that now we are coined it and we name it as the Byzantine period, the first problems of the Jews started when the Christian religion became the dominant religion of the empire. So roughly at the 5th century, we know that the first bishops started accusing Jews and gave ground to what it will be named till the end of the ancient regime as religious anti-Semitism, that they were targeted because of all this, and they carry out all these prejudices against Jews through the crucifixion and all the other stuff. But it was quite interesting that in certain periods, there were periods of peace and other periods of tensions that we will witness them even in the early 20th century, not only the Greek territories. So this is the western and the eastern part of the Roman Empire. Actually, we will discuss a little bit about how it was coined, this name Romaniotes, okay? Because also Greeks at the time of the Roman Empire were identified as Romans. And later on, with the Ottomans, especially in the Ottoman Empire period, they were called the Rum-Millet, Rum from the Romans. So the difference for the Romaniote Jews is that they called themselves Romaniotes because they were of Jewish religion. In the western part of Greece, we had roughly on the 15th century, 14th century, 15th century, that they became enclaves, they became important trade hubs for the Italian republics, like the Venetians and Genova. So is the first places that we witness the establishment of ghettos. This is in Corfu, for instance, in the island of Corfu, or in the island of Zakynthos. The other neighborhoods that we have in the towns, they're not segregated. They don't have walls, they don't have nothing. But as most of the communities during the Ottoman period were separated, were divided because of the Ottoman system, of the Millet system, that we will talk a little bit about it, they were also divided. So we had a Jewish neighborhood that usually was named like Ovreika. It's the Greek word for the term of Jew. So the fall in Constantinople and the dissolution of the Eastern Roman Empire, of the Byzantine Empire, brought for about roughly 450 years the reign of the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Empire was a multinational, multi-religion empire, but the dominant religion was Muslims, because it was Islam, because exactly the Ottomans were Muslims. So in the beginning, they were treated differently, the Greek Romaniote Jews, because of their Greek affiliation. So in the beginning also, we know that there were some conversions. Most of the time in the beginning were forcible. Later on, we have some voluntary, that they consisted the first, let's say, recruited presidential army, the Janissars. The Janissars were mainly constituted by Christians and by Jews. Why was that? Because usually the sultans, that it was the supreme position of the Ottoman Empire, they wanted to have people that they will be soldiers, that they will be loyal to them, and they won't be influenced by the other successors, possible successors of the throne. And thus they couldn't be Muslims. That is why they recruited Janissars. To understand the complexity and also the importance of the Janissaries during this period is that they remained as a force, as a part of the system till 1826, when all of them, they were massacred at the end. So in how they were formed, the millet were formed in the basis of religion. That was mainly established by the Ottomans in order how to collect taxes. That practically means that all Christian Orthodox, we had already the division at that time of the Christian church with the Catholics and the Orthodox. At that time, the millets were established in the form of religion. So all Christians constituted the Rum millet. So the ecumenical patriarch, who was a Christian Orthodox, was stationed and he was part of the Ottoman administration system in Constantinople, today's Istanbul. The same applied for the Romaniote Jews, that they established a separate millet. The problem was that it became later on is that with the arrival of the Sephardim Jews on the late 15th century. Yeah, is it? I don't have any water. Excuse me about that. You know, I forgot to bring it. No, it's okay. I will make it. So the problem is that although that they had the chief rabbi that he was a Greek Romaniote, Kapsalis, the arrival of the Sephardim outnumbered the Romaniote Jews. This is the great migration of the Sephardim Jews with a well-known Alhambra decree in 1492, you know, and some of them made the stopover for a few generations in Italy, in Livorno, mainly in Naples, and in the other Italian cities, but most of them, they were welcomed in the Ottoman Empire exactly because the Sultan understood that he needed traders, merchants, and people that they have connections with the West. So at that time, the culture that the Sephardim Jews had, there is unique Ladino Jewish Spanish dialect, the Sephardim dialect that they used. It was quite, you know, it was dominating because the Greek Romaniote Jews more or less kept the customs of the Greeks. So whether you were a Greek Christian or a Greek Jew was fairly the same, especially for the Ottomans. So this separation at the end, since they were outnumbered because also the Sephardim Jews were tens of thousands that they arrived in the Ottoman ports, it wasn't exactly assimilated, but at the time, especially in the 16th and 17th centuries, they didn't claim that they were Romaniotes. They preferred to tell that they were, their descent was Sephardim Jews. So the problem was that they were considered as surgun, as exiles for the Ottomans, while the Sephardim Jews were considered as kediyelem, meaning that they were migrants, immigrants, that they were voluntarily came and they were actually invited. So that is why actually they merged. And we know that the French Revolution made the first end of the discrimination against the Jews in the Western territories of the European continent. It was the first step, not that it ended, but the emancipation of the Jewish communities, that they progressively became a part of the agenda of the new states, was up to the springtime of people in the mid-19th century with the revolutions in 1848. This is contrary to what happened in Greece's case, because in Greece we had the Greek Revolution. It's one of the first major national revolutions that occurred before the 1848 revolutions. It's one of the first ones that it had a national character. It was, you know, we know that national identity is a construction, but it's the first one that we witness this development of the Greek national identity, that you are becoming a Greek. The point is, what was the crucial factor? Was the language? Well, some of the rebels didn't speak Greek. Some they were nomads, Vlachs, some they were Urbanites, that they were talking a dialect of Albanian. So the bonding element that they needed turned to be religion. And since religion was the bonding element, meaning that they were Christians, all the others were expelled. And of course, since the Jews, it's this dilemma where you should stand, it was quite logical that the Ottoman Empire, that was the big player in the area, the Greek Revolution was actually in the beginning was a failure. They preferred to keep a cautious stance, neutral, not to do anything. However, the successful outbreak of the Greek Revolution in the territories of Peloponnese brought a havoc in the Jewish communities, meaning that they were eradicated. Excuse me. So we don't know exactly the number, but we know that the Jewish communities in Peloponnese, that there weren't so many. I mean, there were few, some hundreds, they were wiped out. This was one of the outcomes, especially in the times of chaos and of bloodshed. So in the post-war period, in the post-revolution period, it was the first time that we have some accounts, because we don't have many key account witness about what happened exactly in the Greek Revolution. It's one source, because for instance now recently in the few years we trace some new information, some from the archives in Chalkida. It's one of the towns that it's close to Athens, and it had a significant Jewish community in these years, that the Jewish community of Chalkida sided with the Greek Revolution. And the truth is, to understand how important is, how it works, the whole notion, is that when the Greek Revolution, during the outbreak of the Greek Revolution, as a reprisal, the first thing that the Ottomans did is that they wiped out all the elite of the Greeks that they were stationed, that they lived in Constantinople. And the major placement of that was the ecumenical patriarch, that he was hanged in the front door of the ecumenical patriarch church, Gennadios. So the rumor that was spread is that the Jews mutilated his body after that he was hanged. The truth is that probably, since nobody else carried out the task, they were asked some Jewish workers to throw it in at the Bosporus. Okay, and this is how rumors, getting exaggerated, and the whole story is becoming so real. So after the establishment of the Greek state, equal rights were granted to everyone. However, we know that religious anti-Semitism remained a factor of the Orthodox Church. It's this we can't conceal, we don't want to, because we have to understand, how the system was working at that time. And religion was a very strong part of the Greek national identity, because it was a bonding element, especially after the establishment of the Greek state. However, we have also to understand that in daily life, they didn't have nothing to separate, and they lived together. So this is more or less the Greek communities in Greece. If you will see close to, I don't have a laser, close to Athens, we have Chalkida, and the main Romaniote community is Ioannina, that it's in the western part of the map, that it was annexed in 1913 in the Balkan Wars. in the beginning of the 19th century, this is quite interesting, that we have a major migration of Greeks towards the States. This is not only for Greek Christians, but also for Greek Jews, because it was all the problems that they had at that time. And many of them went all the way to New York, and they've established a very vivid community there. And one of the main synagogues in the lower Manhattan is the Kehila Kedosa Yanina, that it still remains. It's quite vivid. I mean, they have a Greek Jewish festival that it's quite popular, and they're doing a tremendous job there. And Marcel Nadjari, that she is the director, and the people that run the synagogue and the museum, they remain, they keep this tradition of the Romaniote identity. In more or less, and this is quite interesting, more or less in the beginning of the 20th century, we have the consolidation of what we say today Romaniote communities, meaning there were communities all around Greece, except of the northern part, on the northern territories, that they were mainly Sephardim Jewish communities, close to Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki was so big, it had more than 50,000 people during the Greek period. It was considered to be the Jerusalem of the Balkans. It was a great cultural center, spiritual. It was, the Jewish merchants had ties with all the Mediterranean. The Romaniote communities, however, they had different characteristics. They were speaking Greek, they had the rituals that they were combined. I will talk briefly about this. And they were mainly in the territories that already was Greek at that time, in the beginning of the 20th century. So Thessaloniki and the rest of the territories in the northern part of Greece, I will show it. All this part, all the north part became part of Greece after 1912. So most of the communities in the south and the center of the country were considered as Romaniote because they were speaking Greek. So the biggest and the most important, the largest and the most important was the Romaniote Jewish community of Ioannina, the one that was in the western part of Greece. So the city of Ioannina was considered the center of the Romaniote Jewish population. It is assumed that the synagogue existed since the 19th century CE, almost coinciding with the founding of the city of Ioannina. Jews are known to have lived in Nicopolis, Actio, and Narta, that they were in ancient Greek places, in the surrounding coastal area since late antiquity, and there is a reference for the existence of a Jewish population in Ioannina after Andronicus II Paleologus in the 14th century in the Byzantium period. In the Ottoman period, as noted, the Jews consisted a distinct millet. So in the early 20th century, the crisis which struck the Ottoman Empire with political friction, nationalist fervor, make financial difficulties and low living standards that affected all of them, Jews, Muslims, Christians the same. The 4,000 Jews living in Ioannina faced similar related problems. As a result of this crisis, a significant number of Jewish people of Ioannina followed the general migration current from Greece and left mainly for the United States of America. They kept the same customs. I mean, it's quite interesting that we know that even brides, future to be brides, they were leaving Ioannina as the Christian women, the Greek Christian women, were doing from other parts of Greece, to go and meet their future to be husband in New York, that he was already established there. The Romaniote Jews of Ioannina maintained the demographic balance of their community, upholding strict customs regarding intermarriage, which also applied to nearby communities like those of Trikala, Preveza, and Corfu until the mid-20th century. In the 19th century, marriages had often been arranged by young people's parents, while until the 1940 marriages made through a matchmaker. This is very common. As well as a sum of money, the dowry would include everything that was necessary to set up a new household, and these things would be displayed at the bride's home on Thursday before the wedding. It's exactly the same customs that we have for the Christian marriages. The reading of the wedding contract, or ketubah, was a very important moment in any Jewish wedding. The document was drawn by special assessors, and as well as giving a detailed description and evaluation of the dowry, meaning details, even how many seats they were getting, the new couple, and it also made a clear statement of the marital duties of its spouse. Thank God. It was also customary for the bride and groom to exchange presents. The bride was usually given a long gold chain. Actually, Ioannina was the center of silversmiths and of silversmith specialists in Greece. That is why mainly we have engravings also in the Torahs, silver engravings in the Torahs that we know that they're coming from Ioannina. Weddings took place within the first 2 weeks of the lunar month when the moon was waxing, but not during important religious feasts. The bride-to-be had a ritual bath called a mikvah on the day before the wedding. It was one of the most important obligations a woman had because it left her spirituality cleansed and pure. Romaniote homes in Ioannina often had a cistern in the basement. We didn't have washing rooms all over Greece in that period, which served as a bath or mikvah. Weddings took place in the synagogue and were usually held on Sunday afternoons. The couple stood under a chuppah, a canopy made of white cloth, or a talit stretched over 4 poles, symbolizing the new household and the sacred roof. The purpose of marriage was, of course, to deliver children. For 40 days following a birth, I have it. Just give me, that's the Aleph. For 40 days, For 40 days following a birth, the new mother and the newborn child were protected from evil spirits, from the bad eye, as we say in Greece, from Lilith, with various customs and talismans to ward them off. In the Romaniote community of Ioannina, as in every traditional community, the birth of a boy called for a great celebration. There was a uniquely Romaniote custom that was observed in Ioannina. It was the writing of the Aleph. This is the Aleph in Hebrew. The certificate of circumcision, which was decorated with wishes and prayers to protect from the bad eye, written in beautiful script and served the purpose of a charm for both mother and child as it hung over the wall along with a broad ribbon and florins threaded on strings. However, it was, as I said, it was mainly used for protection from the bad eye. A small family celebration will be held at home after the naming ceremony of girls. They didn't have an Aleph. It is quite interesting to make a parenthesis here. These photographs are from one of the most important Romaniote Jewish families in Ioannina, is the Levi family. They were merchants, they were quite wealthy. Of course, we should be aware that social inequalities were in the Jewish community as it was in all other communities in Greece. Few had reasonable wealth, many they were what we call today petit bourgeois, and many they were pretty penniless. So but it was very important. I mean, one of the Dr. Levi had one of the first cars that it was iconic. When he was coming from the village, he was passing from the villages, all the villages were getting out to see the monster that was passing. And the sad story is that we traced a member of this family, traced these photographs after the World War. They visited Ioannina after the Holocaust, and nothing was left there. Actually, the community was eradicated in percentages of 90%. But they found a photograph. It's a big lake by Ioannina. It's not, you can't see it because it's on the left of the photograph. So it was a photographer. At that time, photographers were outside. They didn't have a store. They didn't have an enterprise. It was a carryable enterprise. So they were, and because people they couldn't afford to have, they didn't have money to take photographs all the time. He was having a different system that you could see something like a cinema, like a movable cinema. And he had these plaques, photographic plaques that you could have your eye in, and you could see how Ioannina looked in the beginning of the century. So one of the women that visited after the Holocaust Ioannina to see what was left, the mansion was plundered and was burnt. She went there, just to have a look, to spend some time. And paying the photographer, she started looking the story of her family, because these were the photographs. They bought them, and they make a very good album about that. About the Levi family, that was one of the most important families of Ioannina. So the interior of Romaniote homes was no difference from that of homes of Christians. Visitors were received in the sitting room or dining room. Usually the sitting room was closed during the other time of the year, only if festivities was open, where there would be a sideboard and a low sofa or on das. It's from the Balkans. Jewish homes were, however, different in character, thanks to all the artifacts and paraphernalia they contained for worship in the home. On the right-hand post of the front door and of the doors to the rooms, there was a mezuzah, a small case containing a piece of paper or parchment with part of the Shema, the main prayer in Judaism, written on it. Other essential objects are the Chanukia, the candle holder for the 8 Hanukkah candles, the Megillah or Medglach, a gift a father-in-law gives his son-in-law on the first Purim in his married life, and the Seder plate for Pesach and various different amulets. The Romaniote women of Ioannina were in all times housewives. In addition to keeping their homes clean and tidy, every Friday afternoon, they whitewashed their courtyards, signaling the start of the weekly Sabbath day of rest. For every celebration, only the best embroidery and linen was to be seen in Jewish homes, most of it worked in design and stitches that were well known all over the Ottoman Empire. I remember my grandmother did the same, and she was chasing me when I was opening her drawers, in other times. Jewish housewives were well aware that the home and the exceptionally cheerful celebrations that take place in it, such as the preparation of meals, the lighting of the Sabbath candles, and the blessing of children, is the place where traditions are handed down from one generation to the next. Jewish food, interesting, from Ioannina is also wonderful. There was different food for every celebration, and it always made use of whatever was in season. So Jewish New Year was usually celebrated with a astari, and the celebration of a circumcision, the most usual sweet to offer was fnaro. Another Romaniote sweet was called bozika, and then we had desserts that we also have in Christian houses, like pasteliko, karkanakia, lalagites, and bugatsa. Bugatsa is common till today. So Romaniote Jews played a significant role in every field of the arts in Ioannina and in the rest of Greece. The Romaniote Jews of the city contributed to its theatrical productions, and since drama is inalienable from Jewish tradition and it's an important feature of religious festivals, their plays were mostly inspired by religious themes. So plays written for Purim told the story of Esther in Judeo-Greek and attracted great interest because of the imaginative costumes that the actors wore. Myths, fairy tales, folk stories, and proverbs of the Romaniote Jews of Ioannina brought together local tradition and features of Jewish mythology and theology. The influence of the folk music, unfortunately, I was trying to find a small clip, but I didn't, I didn't find it at the end. The influence of the folk music of Epirus as it evolved under the Ottoman Empire is recognizable in Romaniote music, which uses the same instruments, be they the same, the violins, the lutes, the clarinets, the tambourines, and has the same rhythmic patterns and melodic phrases. It is noteworthy point that the musicians who played the instruments in the Jewish celebrations and festivities, many times they were Christians. So Romaniote hymns had a strongly Byzantine ring to them, and the Jewish folk songs of Ioannina bring those of the Christian population to mind. The typical form was of the stichoplakia that it was used. It was a type of urban music, was the 15-syllabic rhyming couplet with regular rhyme. The subject matter was mainly morally religious, but there were also narrative songs in praise of nature and love. Romaniote Jews observed the religious prohibition of the representation of the human form. In their folk art, embroidery, gold and silverware, the prominent motifs, as I said, that since many of them they were silversmiths, are geometric forms and sacred religious symbols. Romaniote Jews practice a unique set of liturgy, including religious melodies and piyutim, Jewish religious poetry, unlike those of the Ashkenazi communities and of the Sephardim. Each melody or song is used for a specific holiday, Sabbath, life cycle event, or community celebration. Most are sung with traditional Hebrew prayers, but some are still read in the Judeo-Greek dialect of the Romaniote Jews of Ioannina. This is the Jewish community today, and it's quite interesting to say that the community roughly has in Ioannina around 60, 70 people. They are very lucky, and actually the people of Ioannina in general, they're very lucky because the gentleman on the right is the mayor of Thessaloniki, is the first Greek Jewish mayor that we have in the country. And it's important because he's an excellent person. I mean, he's an iconic figure of Ioannina. He's a friend, he's a doctor, he's an intellectual, he's someone that, helped a lot Ioannina to be, let's say, to be open to diversity. And that is why in the major celebrations, like in Yom Kippur, there are hundreds of people, Christians, that they attend along with the Jews all the liturgy in the synagogue of Ioannina. The Second World War made the most of the problems for the Jewish communities in Greece. Most of the communities were eradicated. We have the first phase of the deportations started in March 1943 by the Nazis in Thessaloniki, that it was the largest Jewish community with roughly 50,000 people. 46,000 people were deported in 19 missions with 19 trains. And we had the 96% of people that they were lost in the Holocaust. We had less than 2,000 people return back to Thessaloniki. This is the line of the people that goes from the ghettos that they were established just a few weeks before the onset of the deportations, and they went all the way to the transit ghetto that was next to the railway station. And this is the second stage of the deportations, that it happened after the Italian armistice in September 1943, that the Germans assumed power in all Greece. Greece was divided in 3 different occupational zones during the Second World War. A part of it was occupied by the Bulgarians, who were allies to the Nazis. And the onset of the deportation of the Jewish communities in Greece started by the Bulgarians on the beginning of March. It continued with a main wave, with the deportations of North Greece by the Nazis of Thessaloniki and the neighboring communities. And the second stage happened a year after, in March 1944. That practically means 6 months shy from the end of the occupation in Greece, because the Germans left the country in October 1944. We had even the expulsion of the Jewish communities in Rhodes and in Corfu that happened just in June and July, just few weeks before the retreat of the German troops by the country. And this is, it's not reasonable. At the time that Germany was retreating in all battlefronts, in all war fronts, that the Allied troops were marching in Rome at the same time they were carrying out the final solution plan with ferocity in Greece. For instance, in Corfu, it happened the same day in 9 June that the Allied troops were marching in Rome. And all the Jews of Ioannina were called on the 25th of March 1944 to gather in the waterfront by the lake. It's the day of the national celebration for the Greek Revolution. So most of the people, of the notables, they were going to be in the church that was in the other side. So it was a German plan that was carried out quite successfully, and 90% of the community was lost. But this is the quite interesting part that I wanted just briefly to show you. This is a photograph from the Greek resistance that many Jews, hundreds of Jews, found shelter in the mountains, and they were protected by the partisans during the occupation and the persecution of the Jews. It is, first of all, you can understand that it's a setup photograph from the photographer, because you see one by one women and men. It's the first time that we see women with such an active role also. But the interesting part is that the second man is a Romaniote Jew, Salvatore Bacolas. And it was completely coincidental, okay? It didn't have nothing to do that he was a Jew for this photograph. But it's quite interesting because we could identify the Romaniote Jews from the Sephardim Jews, because Romaniote Jews had Greek surnames, Bacolas, Kapsis, Kapsalis, whereas the Sephardim, they had mainly surnames from the places that they were coming, or Italian or Spanish, that they were quite distinct. Fernandez, for instance, or Alatini, or Modiano. And why I said that identity, language as identity, is that this was the main feature that we considered as important in the Greek Jews, that they were using the Greek language. They felt, they had a Greek mentality, they had a Greek national feeling. The only difference that they had, that they were Jews. It wasn't any other difference. However, they weren't protected during the Second World War. But this is something, it's unique. It's from the cylinder of Auschwitz. It's a script written in Greek by a Sephardim Jew, because since Thessaloniki was part of Greece since 1912, we had a whole generation of Thessaloniki Jews that they were cultured and they were educated in Greek language. And they felt the same. They were Greeks. So Marcel Nadjari was a Sonderkommando. Sonderkommando was the ones that they had this terrible task of emptying the gas chambers, burning the bodies of the Jews in Auschwitz-Birkenau. So in order to leave a testimony about what was happening, he wrote a 13-page script. He put it in a cylinder, in a can, and buried it underground in Auschwitz because he was sure that he wouldn't survive. He survived, but he died in 1971, and this was discovered in 1985. In pure Greek, he described the whole process of how the Holocaust, how the industrial death was committed. And I would like to briefly give you an outlook why we think that Greek language is as important as the identity of the Romaniote Jews. This is a prolific figure, poet Joseph Elia. So Joseph Elia was born in Ioannina in 1901, in a member of an underprivileged family. However, he managed to have proper education at the Alliance Israelite Universal Secular School. Benefited by this modern French education system, égalité, fraternité, the ideals of the French Revolution, he sympathized with workers and sought to create a socialist egalitarian society. So he started teaching at the Alliance Universelle School, but he was feared by the authorities in Ioannina as a dangerous radical. Communists in the interwar period were persecuted severely in Greece. And finally, he was laid off from his teaching position. He was forced to go into exile from his town Ioannina and took a teaching position in a remote, small Macedonian town, Kilkis, northeast of Thessaloniki. To understand the complexity of the social stratification and relations, not only in Ioannina society, but in general, and also inside the Jewish community, when he started gaining fame from his intellectual work, he was referred sometimes by the leaders of the community or the authorities contemptuously as the son of the mistress. Elijah wrote poetic love songs dedicated to Rebecca, his idolized figure of love, and also produced Greek translations of Isaiah, Job, the Song of Songs, Ruth, and Jonah, as well as the works of medieval and modern Jewish writers. A street is named today Elijah in Ioannina under his name. His search for the essence of Greekness, this the pursuit of Greekness, and the need to recreate a new Greek Jewish identity, especially in light of the transition for 450 years of Ottoman rule and traditional life to a new identity under the Greek Republic, was his main scope. Unfortunately, he died very young. He was 30 years old. The second figure is Mordechai Frizis, that he always considered himself a Greek, and he was accepted as a Greek. Mordechai Frizis was born in Chalkida, the city that was close to Athens, and he was among 13 children, 12 boys and 1 girl. The Jews in the city of Chalkida belong to the Romaniote community that it's believed to have been a part of the oldest Jewish population in Europe, established about 2,500 years ago. In 1916, he found himself engulfed in the patriotic spirit and volunteered in the Greek army during the First World War. His university education sent him directly to the military academy. So his dreams became a reality, a Greek Jewish officer in the services of the Hellenic Kingdom of Greece. Frizis will fought with the Greek army in Crimea in the Entente effort to counter-battle the Bolsheviks. And in their retreat, this is quite interesting episode, they were stationed in Moldova in the town of Kishinev, where anti-Jewish pogroms had taken place some years before. They were usual. So when he entered the store to buy some things and he understood that the merchant was Jew, he started speaking Jewish to him. So seeing someone in a military uniform, that he was legitimate, as a Jew to be an officer, it was a great surprise for the Jewish merchant, and actually they provide them all the supplies to the Greek army without asking any money. It was one of the first episodes, that it's quite interesting that we came across. So the news about Mordechai spread immediately. That's why he received this support. And in 1922, he participated in the Greek campaign in Asia Minor. During the crucial battle in August 1922, where the Greek army was crushed, Lieutenant Frizis was captured as a prisoner of war along with his soldiers. When the Turks realized that he was not Christian, he was offered his freedom and a safe passage to return to Greece. He refused. He remained with his troops, gaining more fame by that. When fascist Italy declared war and invaded Greece on 28 October 1940, through Albania, Frizis was in the first line with his infantry. When the Greek counteroffensive began, it found himself once more leading his detachment into Albania. His soldiers adored him, and he also called them my boys. Lieutenant Colonel Frizis continued riding his horse as Italian planes bombed the Greek positions. A bomb wounded him seriously, but he continued fighting till a machine gun killed him. Since there was no rabbi deployed at the battlefront, this is also another interesting point. A Christian Orthodox priest carried over the task by endorsing fully the Jewish rituals. He placed his hand on Mordechai's head and prayed, Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Lieutenant Colonel Mordechai Frizis was the first high-ranking officer in the Greek army to be killed in World War II. He was buried in Albania, and his remains were brought back in 2004, and he was buried in the cemetery in Chalkida with the presence of the Greek president of democracy. But the place where Greekness was acknowledged to the Greek Jews, unfortunately, was in the death camps. There was no exception. Jews from Greece were the Greeks. And this is no better reference to it, but the words of Primo Levi in his iconic work, If This Is a Man. The professional merchants stand in the market, each one in his normal corner. First among them come the Greeks, as immobile and silent as sphinxes, squatting on the ground behind their bowls of thick soup, the fruits of their labor, of their cooperation, and of their national solidarity. The Greeks have been reduced to very few by now, but they have made a contribution of the first importance to the physiognomy of the camp and to the international slang in circulation. Everyone knows that caravana is the bowl, and that la comedera es buena, this is Spanish, means that the soup is good. The word that expresses the generic idea of theft is klepsi, of obvious Greek origin. We used to play with these words, when we were stealing the one from the other, klepsi. These few survivors from the Jewish colony of Salonika and from the other areas, with their two languages, Spanish and Greek, and their numerous activities, are the repositories of a concrete, mundane, conscious wisdom in which the tradition of all the Mediterranean civilizations blends together. That this wisdom was transformed in the camp into the systematic and scientific practice of theft and seizure of positions and the monopoly of the bargaining market should not let one forget that their aversion to gratuitous brutality, their amazing consciousness of the survival of at least a potential human dignity, made of the Greeks the most coherent national nucleus in Lager, and in this respect, the most civilized. It's an iconic description about the Greeks and the Greekness in the death camps, in the most wrong place that they could be defined. But there's another one, the third one, and I will close with him. It's Haim Kostis, that he was a Romaniote Jew from Chalkida. The Jewish community of Chalkida found shelter, most of them, in the mountains. He was one of the few, and they found shelter and protection by the partisans. He was one of the few, along with his sister, that they were captured and they were deported in Auschwitz. So he managed to survive, and he first sent a card, a Red Cross card, to his people back in Chalkida, writing, "I'm alive and I shall return." Then he sent a 4-page letter in June 1945. The first page is the one. At the time that he was hospitalized in the Auschwitz Russian hospital in block number 22. In this 4-page letter, the survivor Haim Kostis communicates to his beloved family back home news about his health, expresses his agony about their fate, refers to his compatriots and to the fate of his sister Lula, that he knew that he survived, but there were more numerous deaths also after their liberation. "Dear Daddy, dear Mommy, my dear sisters, I'm shaking by emotion, thinking the joy you have by reading my letter. I'm in the Auschwitz hospital because this is what His Mighty decided for the first time since I left home. By saying mighty, he means God. And he uses the same word that the Greek Christians use. It's the same for the Greek Jews, megalodynamos. It's what he's mighty or he's almighty. I mean, it's a big hospital with very good doctors. It's the Russian hospital. And now I'm waiting to get well, and I'll go to find Lula, who is in the women's section. What I have suffered here, Mommy, can't be described, and when I'll return home, we will have so many things to discuss. Be patient. I'm in a hurry to come back to Greece first, in order to see you, and second, in order to drink water. In this cursed place, the water is full of iron. It is horrible being continuously thirsty. I would like to tell you much more, but this is all I can say. Thirst, as an ultimate suffering, will be mentioned again by his sister Lula, in her interview for the Visual History Archive in 1998. Both siblings, Haim and Lula, refer with the senses to this recurrent hallucination they both had in the camps, that they were drinking fresh water, sparkling water, served at the best sweet shop of their home lovely town of Chalkida. Continuing his letter, Kostis referred briefly to the horrible life in Auschwitz. While laying in bed in Birkenau Hospital with a friend of mine at night, I was remembering the nightmare of the ovens burning Jews alive. Because the Germans here not only burned all the Jews, but they obliged the Jews themselves to burn the others, refer to the Sonderkommandos. As Solomakis Cohen did, who worked there and burned Kambai, a fellow citizen from Chalkida, as he told me next day. So we lay there in the hospital, and we were thinking of a small cabin with a warm fire because it's so cold today. And he finishes this double scene of nightmare and daydreaming with the words, "How is it possible for me to philosophize?" Addressing his beloved cousin, whom he knew hidden in Chalkida, he writes, "You have been much luckier than I did, my dear Zakin, and you did not suffer what I suffered. I'm not saying this because I'm jealous, since now I'm quite happy with what was happened, etc. My heart is so big now that it could contain the whole world. My experiences here made me feel and worship life. The only thing that remains in this world is gratitude of the soul, generosity. Everything else is people pettiness." And he invited his family to prepare for his homecoming with a typical Greek expression of joy. It's one that we used to use it before we had, before mobile phones, emails were, become so popular that you had, and even phone lines were rare. We used these three words when we had festivities, when we had special celebration, birthday, name day, because we celebrate also name days, a wedding. I mean, it was where the house was ready to welcome everyone that was passing by. They were going to be treated. It was food. It was dessert. It was everything that they wanted. It was open. So the three words that Haim Kostis used, and this is how beautiful his language as identity, were άνοιξε το σπίτι, open the house. So I would like to thank Yael Aronoff and Zerlinger Institute for opening their house to me and to the Greek Romaniote Jews at the Michigan State University. Thank you very much. And thanks for the water. So anyone that wants to ask something or to have any question, please step in the microphone because it's a live broadcast. And if anyone.
Can you please clarify the relationship between Thessaloniki and Ioannina?
Yep. Greek cities, first of all. Before the Second World War, we didn't make distinction, but actually is how the communities were formed, that the Jewish community of Thessaloniki was considered the greatest center of Sephardim in the Mediterranean. It was a big city. It was a commerce hub. It was a crossroad of trade. So the Jews were prospered there. After 1922, they became officially a minority because we had the influx of Greek Christian refugees. More than 150,000 people came from Asia Minor after the exchange population between Greece and Turkey. So they formed a part of the city, about 1/4 of it, 25% of the people of Thessaloniki who had the Jewish origin. They remained as a Sephardim culture, but in the onset of the Second World War, all of them, I mean half of the Jews of Thessaloniki, they were fluent in Greek, and they had a Greek national identity. I mean, they had a Greek national feeling. That is clear. The only distinction that we have with the Jews of Ioannina is that they were always Greek-speaking Jews. They were Romaniote Jews, and they were considered themselves as Romaniote Jews. If I made a clear statement about that. Thank you.
All right, Andreas, thanks. I've been to a few Finifters, and the Romaniote Jews, like, they're still a mystery to me, and until now, I think I got it, because you brought a thesis, you know, that this incredible endurance is a result of language as identity. Because looking at this, it's kind of amazing that they made it to the Holocaust, to me. Because, right, like, it's just kind of amazing to me that this community could have survived.
I believe this happened in the local communities because local communities, whether they were Christian or Jews, they were living together. They were mingling, they were doing business, and they didn't have any kind of barriers.
Yeah, but I also mean in terms of their cultural distinctiveness, that they survived. That's what my question is about. My question is about how that happened. If we should look at, I mean, just to look away from language for a second, I thought, wow, the ghettoized Venetian Romaniote Jews that weren't just in Venice, but the experience of the Romaniote Jews that was distinctive.
In Corfu.
In Corfu, but not in places like Crete, not throughout the Venetian world. No. Aha, I see. So anyway, I was wondering if in a sense, well, at least these Corfu Jews, you know, they were walled off in a way that Byzantine Jews had not been, and that Ottoman Jews certainly wouldn't be.
Exactly.
You know, with the War of Revolution, the Greek language doesn't seem to have saved all those Jews in the Peloponnese, right? So
correct.
Is it maybe that they were left behind from the process in the Ottoman Empire, where it wouldn't have been possible to be a Romaniote Jew in the Ottoman world, right?
The truth is that why this happened is that, as I told you, that first of all, animosity was great against the Turks because we had the revolution. There were great reprisals against the Christians. And since they kept a low profile, and actually they were afraid, and in Tripolis, that was the main administration center of Peloponnese, that it was the main goal for the Greeks to conquer the city, they remained inside the city because they thought that they would be protected. So when the Greeks entered, it was a bloodshed because since there were great massacres of Christians, animosity was great. So everybody was wiped out. I mean, they didn't care who was. Probably even Greeks, you know, that they were inside the fortress happened the same. It's how you keep your identity. I believe that it was because communities in the form as they were the states were quite vivid and quite important. People didn't travel so much. The bonding was great with the place that you were coming from. You couldn't travel. For Ioannina to get to Athens, probably you needed a week. So these communities remain like that, like enclaves, that they kept their tradition, their customs, and these all things were part of their identity. That's why I think it remained, it kept. And it's not only about the Greek Jews of Ioannina, it's the same with the Greek Christians. They were also silversmiths in Ioannina, they were having the same trades. It was exactly the same. The same in Chalkida. For instance, in Athens, there wasn't a significant Jewish community because Athens, when it became capital of Greece, it was completely insignificant of its magnitude. It didn't have anything. It was an abandoned city that it was, it became a capital of Greece exactly because it had the ancient glory, and they wanted to reveal this continuation, this connection between the ancient Greeks and the new Greeks.
So thank you, Andreas, for a fascinating talk. I was trying to think of a big question, but actually I'd like to hone in on something precise that you said. So I'm interested, forgive me if I mispronounce his name, I really appreciated the vignettes of people that you offered towards the end of your talk. So I'm interested in the person of Mordecai Fritzis and his multidimensionality. So you said he was in Moldova, in Kishinev or Chisinau. I assume he was there as part of an anti-Bolshevik force under the French army.
It was the Greek army.
You're right.
It constituted the regiment.
My understanding is the French oversaw or at least helped the Greeks get there. I don't know the whole specifics of it all. But anyhow, that's not to the point. You said he spoke in Jewish.
Yes.
So what do you mean by that? Do you mean Yiddish?
It's a correct question that we didn't know the answer. The reference we have is that he spoke Hebrew, not Yiddish. He didn't know Yiddish, of course, because he was a Romaniote, but probably he knew the rituals. That's why he was fluent also in Hebrew, because in Chalkida they were practicing, they were going in the synagogue. There were around 300 Romaniote Jews, and that he spoke Hebrew. This is a narration, so it gets into these legends, that it's probably some sites it can be exaggerated. But for sure that they understood that he was a Jew and he was in a uniform.
Interesting. It's fascinating that he received a response.
I didn't know it either. I recently found out about it.
But I guess to me, the larger question I have is, so he does this, and it offers a service for his entire regiment, presumably, which was made up of non-Jews as well. So he's occupying a status as a Jew, but also occupying a status as a Greek soldier. So what information do you have about the way in which his comrades in arms perceived him? And I guess I'm still searching for some explanation of what Romaniote Jews took from Greek culture, why they perceived a particular affinity between them and the larger Greek community. And in this person, I think you have a wonderful representation, but I'd just like to learn a little more. Thank you.
You're welcome. First of all, it's one of the few cases that we know that he became an officer. First of all, it was to understand, this fake news that we have widely spread, is that the Jews didn't go in the army. And that we have already, specific evidences that since the late 19th century, we know that the Jews were enlisted in the Greek army. We know that we have at least 12,000 Jews that they fought in the first line in the Greek-Italian War. And we have more than 650 casualties. But he was an iconic figure because he was widely accepted to the troops. It was a period of tension because of the involvement of the military in politics. He was widely accepted because he was a right officer. First of all, he was very close to his soldiers. That's why his regiment where he was killed in the Second World War, they were calling them the Frizzis boys because he was always taking care of them, to have their provisions, to be protected, to be hospitalized. He was widely accepted that he was a Greek. It's one of the rare cases, that's why we're using it, trying to penetrate all these misjudices, all the prejudices against the Jews. Considering why they acquire the same customs is because these customs were developed by both communities. It wasn't only the Jews inherited customs by the Christians. It was the Christians inherited customs by the Jews. It was this blend that the Romaniotes had with the Christians in the communities that they lived together. Even in Thessaloniki, that we have 50,000 people, we know that they were having this blend. I mean, many Greek songs, rebetiko songs, popular folk songs in Greece, they have their origins in the Sephardim songs that they were translated into Greek with the same rhythm. So it was kind of blend. Of course, we had all these religious antisemitism that especially in tension periods prevailed. Okay, we cannot, acknowledge this fact. But this is a point that we want to highlight this, the perception, that you can live together. And these people managed to live together. A few weeks ago, we saw a documentary with my students, with my big class, before the Thanksgiving Day. It was the Kisses to the Children. It was the documentary about the stories about 5 children that they were Jewish children, that they were hidden during the war. So one of the ladies that she was referring to her case, she said, I always spoke Greek. I didn't know any other language because I'm a Romaniote Jew. I mean, she was so proud of telling that, that you have to give credit to these people. Yep.
Thank you, Andreas.
Thanks for being here, actually, because you have to drive back.
I do have to drive back. That's true. I live in Ann Arbor for this. Two quick questions. One is, you mentioned the Chanukiah, the thing, and I became curious when you mentioned that because, of course, the story of Hanukkah, I don't know if everybody's familiar, but the story of Hanukkah is a story of enmity between Greeks and Jews, right? Mm-hmm. It is an attempt of the story is, the Greek attempt to basically force the Jews to, abandon their Jewish religion and the Jewish resistance, we survived, that kind of narrative, So it made me think about what it is like to celebrate Hanukkah as a Greek Jew in Greece.
No.
Because there is an enmity there in the story, even though it's a long time ago. Mm. So that's one question. My second question, and I'll need Matt's help on this. So there is, for certain parts of Europe, I don't know for Greece, I think statistically it is correct, there was a strong Jewish presence in communist parties.
Correct.
I don't know if it's true for Greece, but if it is true for Greece, I wonder after the Second World War, after all, there's a military dictatorship and repression of communists in Greece, whether Jews fell victim again, but this time to repression from the Greek authorities as communists. You see what I'm saying?
I know that very well.
Yeah, so those are my questions. Yeah.
So about the Hanukkah, I don't know many details about that, but in all the Jewish friends that I go, and they have Hanukkah, we always celebrate Hanukkah, and they always have a Christmas tree in their places. I mean, it's in the Thessaloniki we have a perfect blend because we celebrate both. We have both festivities for that, and we actually enjoy all the sweets because also the Sephardim sweets are very good. So no, there's no point. I mean, of course, after the war, oblivion was, and guiltness was, prevailed. People needed to start over their lives, and after the 1990s, we started speaking, and we started researching about that. There's a great research work already done about Jewish customs, about Jewish life, about Jews mingling beyond problems that they were existed. But for the second part, that it's interesting, he was exiled in 1946. In 1946, when the war was over in 1945 and it was year zero that people started to live again, they wanted to build again their lives, we were engaged in a civilian war that we were killing each other for 3 years. We had this luxury, as the Greeks. So many Jews, they found themselves, first of all, some of them, because they participated in the resistance and because they were communists, some of the partisans, of the Jewish partisans, they were members of the Communist Party since the interwar period, so they joined the struggle of the resistance. Many of them participated in the Civil War, and most of them, they were exiled. We had cases that they were in prison for 10 years. The second interesting case, that it's quite sad, is that Jewish men that returned as survivors from the camps, or they were hidden, but mainly the survivors, they were enlisted in the Greek National Army. And they had to serve at least a 3 or 4 years term and fight in the Civil War. You know, I mean, it was outrageous because it was a testimony that we had from someone, Pardo, I think was his name. He was from Thessaloniki. He said, they deported me in 1943. I returned back at the end of 1945. In the beginning of 1947, I was enlisted. I stayed in the army for 4 years. I didn't know anything else to do. You know, I grown up. You know, I became an old man, and still, you know, I was enlisted in 1951, and you know, it's completely insane, and that is why many Jewish men that returned from the camps fled immediately to the Middle East because they were going to be enlisted and fight again a war. Yep, Yore.
So thank you for talking about very, very long history. I'd like to ask some questions about the current communities and the future, because in a more and more globalized world and more kind of globalized Jewish traditions, some traditions are
Vanished.
disappearing. What, in your estimation, is the chances of Romaniote Jewish traditions to survive when there's both the secularized, or the pressure to get more secular on the youth, and also the pressure from Jewish Orthodoxy and ultra-Orthodoxy, Ashkenazi and Sephardi on these communities?
Well, the truth is that this is it's an interesting question, Yura. I don't have a very specific answer to that because, first of all, Jewish communities are rather small in Greece because many people migrated to Palestine, even in the recent years, because of the economic crisis that we had. I mean, the community of Thessaloniki, of Ioannina, numbers 60, 70 people. There were some hundreds in Thessaloniki, there are a few hundreds in Athens. Some communities completely eliminated. I mean, there's no one. I mean, in Crete, we don't have any Jew at the moment. So it's very difficult to keep the customs. I believe that they keep the customs, I mean, some of the rituals and some, because they are part of their identity. And because it's getting, I mean, they're losing this part. We are losing it. Not as historians, as Greeks. We are trying to maintain it. I mean, that's why we're going in Yom Kippur in Ioannina, because we want to celebrate it with our friends there, with our Jewish friends, because we want to remain alive. And I believe that if something from this tradition will survive, will be because other people that are not Jewish will try to maintain this tradition. It's quite sad. And of course, we know that in the Israeli society, the Sephardim and the Mizrahim, they had quite a few problems, and the Romaniote even more, that there were very few. That's true. We had an Ashkenazim-dominated culture. Anyone else? Now is the time because, you know, I'm leaving next week.
I mean, that raises the question for me with such a small community in Greece. People like you are exceptional, aren't you? I mean, so where is the center of Romaniote study, and to what extent is that being done in Israel and elsewhere around the world?
Yes.
Where are your contemporaries?
Yes,
in other words?
It's the truth is that there isn't a specific Romaniote community, you know, center or an institute. We are seeing the Greek Jewish identity as a whole. And I think this is quite important, because by that we can penetrate all the prejudices in some terms or anti-Semitism. So we consider it as a whole, and we should, because we believe that Jews are Greeks, as most of the people, and we don't want to give ground to anti-Semitism. The truth is that that we have very few information about Romaniote Jewish communities. I mean, that is why some of us, we are trying to establish, to regain information as much as we want, because we know that they're going to be perished. Anyone else? Because it's 8:30. Do you want me to close, or do you? I can continue for half an hour, 1 hour. No worries, but there isn't any buffet, actually, so. And I have water. Yes, yes. I would like to thank you for the invitation. Thank you very much, Yael. I really appreciate the invitation. It was a pleasure.
רונן,
מה קורה, בן אדם?
יוליאן שנה.
אכן, תכיר לי את אשתך.
הנה, שנייה. באתי?